Again, my name is Frank Couch, and I'm the coordinator for King County Crisis and Commitment Services. King County Crisis and Commitment Services is just one division in the Behavioral Health and Recovery division of King County. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit. Usually I do this by PowerPoint, and it's quite elaborate. Maybe next time I'll come back and we can do that and walk through it. Because always when I do this ad hoc, I miss something that's really important for you to know. And I know that you've signed up to ask questions, but I would prefer not to leave here without a question that you might have being answered. If I have the answer, I'll answer it. If it's outside of my realm, I'll just say there's somebody better to answer that question. We are located downtown Seattle, and we are on 5th and Jefferson, right across from the King County Jail. It's an office building. We don't see patients there. We don't see clients there. It's King County Crisis and Commitment Services, meaning that we serve all of King County. So that's 25,000 square miles and over close to almost 3 million now people. And we go absolutely everywhere within the county. We see people everywhere: jails, hospitals, supported housing units. We will put on our boots and walk with these kind folks over here out under the bridges and into the jungles and into the unhoused units. We will do all of that stuff. And that's where we see people. So everywhere that people are, that's where we go. There's no place that we don't go. We have 41 career service positions that span over 5 shifts. We are a 24-hour-a-day shop, 7 days a week. So I say that, and that seems like a lot, but we're talking about all of King County. We're talking about the biggest county in Washington State. So that's really not a lot. Any given day, any given time of the day, we have approximately 6 to 8 what we call designated crisis responders. Some of you might know them. The name had changed in 2018. It used to be designated mental health professionals. We work under the law 7105 and 7134, RCW 7105 and RCW 7134, which is the Involuntary Treatment Act. I want to tell you folks that that's not a treatment bill. That is a public safety bill. And I also want to tell you folks that we are not first responders. We are not nearly that nimble. So if there is something that you feel like is an emergent need, that's a 911 call. That's not a call of this number, because we are not that nimble to get out that quickly. However, as I said, we have 6 to 8 people on shift, designated crisis responders. 2 of those folks will always be on the phone, answering calls, taking new cases from folks like you, investigating those cases, because we do have to investigate the allegations that you will make about someone else, a loved one or other. It doesn't have to be a loved one, it can be anyone. We'll investigate those allegations of how someone may be decompensating due to mental illness or substance use disorder, or how they may be becoming a danger to themselves or other, being threatening, or have actually committed physical harm to someone, or are a danger to property. And if it's their property, they get to be a danger to their property. It's your property where it becomes a problem. And so those are the cases that we evaluate. We'll do an investigation, and then we'll go out and get a face-to-face and try to see the person. And if we can see the person, then we'll make a decision on whether or not they need to be detained against their will. This is a civil action, and we can detain them against their will to treatment. We detain them for 120 hours. It used to be 72, so you might be more familiar with that. Now it's 120 hours. And after that 120 hours, whatever hospital that they are currently in will file, if they deem it necessary, one of two things. They'll either file a 14-day hearing to keep them for another 14 days, or they will file and place them on a less restrictive order. But that would be an agreed order between the patient, their defense, because they do have the right to defense, and the prosecution, and there is a prosecutor, and the judge. And so they'll all agree, and the treatment provider that is willing to monitor the less restrictive order. Our job is not only to detain people, but it's also to try to find less restrictive options, and to exhaust every less restrictive option that there is available. The intention of this bill is, there's a couple of intents for the for RCW 7105 and RCW 7134. One of them is to protect the patient and to protect the community from someone that may be out of behavioral control. The other is to deinstitutionalize, and this is an old story where the federal government used to be in charge of federal hospitals, where we would send people for mental health issues. And they would keep people without having a clear treatment plan for long periods of time with no exit strategy. So there was a movement to take the mental health care out of the hands of the federal government and put it back into the hands of the state. And that's where we get these laws from. And so we are required to, use available sources in the communities in which people live. And so that's part of looking at the less restrictive options. And it runs off of a theory called deinstitutionalization. And so having people not be in a place forever, but with a clear path for them to integrate back into the society. And also, I would say that the Behavioral Health and Recovery Division and most of Washington State believe that people do recover, and believe that people with mental illness and substance use disorder can learn to live a productive life. And so that the permanency of institutionalizing someone forever, it's not a clinically indicated thing. It's not appropriate, and we should be trying to get people to be self-sufficient in any way that they can. So, where are we at now? So let's see, this is where I need that PowerPoint to keep me on track, because I've said a lot already. Can I just pause for a second? Does anybody have any questions on anything that I said? Yes, sir.
How many staff are you staffed out right now, and how many are you supposed to be staffed out to serve people?
I love that question, because currently we are running a deficit, but I will tell you that deficit is not a deficit just in my office. Mental health providers in King County, the workforce for behavioral health is in a challenging time right now. We are all vying for the same group of folks, and quite honestly, I hope I don't get in trouble if anybody's watching on television there that might be connected to my boss by saying this, but I'll say it because that's what I do. We're all vying for the same folks, but unfortunately, we don't have a hiring bonus of $5,000 or more. And when you come work for us, you might have to go walk out in the mud to go see somebody, and you never get to really see what happens after we detain somebody, because we're in the crisis. We're crisis work. And so lots of folks are taking that $5,000, sitting in their living room where they don't have to go out in the mud, seeing people online. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, we are at a deficit. I'd have to do the math to tell you what our vacancy rate is. I don't have that at the top of my head right now.
And you guys are unionized?
They are unionized. I'm not.
What is their union?
Their union is SEW 925. Yeah. And the supervisors also are unionized, and they're with Protect. Yes, sir.
How do you differ from the LEAD program? Or do you work together, or is
Yeah.
it a source of referral? What's the difference?
Yeah, so it's totally different. So the LEAD program is a diversion program, strictly a diversion program, and that requires law enforcement to make a decision when they run across a number of different types of situations. They would know better than I. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, there would be addressing people that were in crisis but not necessarily committing crimes, whereas like, you know, we work pretty closely with League here in this precinct. Like, there were some people at Alaska Junction Park that was refusing to get into shelter and things. They wanted to stay together, but they were committing low-level crimes. And so we contacted LEAD and had them do outreach. And after, it was quite the process, but after 6 months, they were able to get them into housing together, which had been this couple's whole point. But without the criminal charges, then LEAD wouldn't have been able to necessarily work with us as much.
So it's criminal versus non-criminal activity, basically.
Yeah, and there probably can be some bleed over, but they're not concerning themselves with the criminal aspect of it. And with LEAD too, before COVID, it was also a carrot versus a stick thing too. Like if somebody was going to be booked into jail on a misdemeanor, we could then call LEAD and say, hey, we think this person is a good person to be diverted from jail. That if you can help them with different resources and stuff, then we won't file the charges and we won't send it to the prosecutor's office.
Well, I would say that where we have crossover with LEAD is occasionally folks that will be on LEAD and be obtaining services may decompensate in some sort of way. And when they decompensate, because they're in LEAD, they have a provider, and that provider may refer them to our office. And to try to interrupt the decompensation and try to get them some services so that they can get back stable again. And so there, and then also when folks have been re-arrested and they are in King County Jail, and as part of that process, the judge may have recognized that it was because decompensation had happened, and that they do well when they're in services, and the judge may write an order to our office asking us to come to the jail and evaluate them to see if they need to be detained and stabilized before they release them. Definitely a lot on these low level like loitering or some of the property crimes, those low-level property crimes where they're going to release them anyway. If there was a way for us to help them because they've decompensated, the judge will write an order for us to see them. Any other questions? Okay, so we work with, I believe it's 36 different law enforcement offices throughout King County. A lot of them are staffed by King County Sheriff's Office. Seattle Police, obviously, fairly large, different precincts throughout the city. And then all of the individual township municipalities that have their own police forces. As I said, we are not first responders. So when we have an open case, very often what will happen is we'll do our investigation. We'll be ready to go do the outreach. We may call you folks and ask if you're willing to meet us there, if you open the case up with us. If you have a relationship with the person that you've referred to. But before we go knock on the door of that person, we are going to call law enforcement. And law enforcement's going to show up and they're going to tell us what they're going to be willing to do. We're going to give them all the information about the case and what we're trying to do. Usually it's going to be either we already have an order and we're trying to do a pickup, or we're trying to evaluate to see whether or not we're going to detain them or not. And that will take its natural course. Law enforcement is there for safety reasons. There's a lot of things that they can't do, and so there's a lot of reasons why we won't be able to do a pickup immediately. If we have an opportunity to have a conversation with them, we will make a decision. And if we make a decision to detain them, but we can't actually do the pickup at that time, we will go back to the office, and this is a legal process. and it's heavily on the legal side. So we'll go back and we'll write a petition asking the judge to grant an order for apprehension. And if they agree with our findings and our rationale of why this person needs to be detained, then they'll write an order. That's what we call a non-emergent order. We call them NEDs. And then we'll continue to work that case, trying to go back over and over again to try to do the pickup on that person. However, if law enforcement has an interaction with that person in between time, there will be a warrant in the system. It's a civil warrant, not a criminal warrant. There's a civil warrant that they'll also be able to pick them up and take them to the nearest hospital. And that plays out just like the 120 hours. And for every additional extension of the stay at the hospital will have to apply, do a new petition to the court, and with a new proof that person needs to be there at the hospital and detained. It's not like we send them there for the 120 hours and that's it. And on that one petition, the hospital is going to have to prove that these folks are not compensating and that they need to be there. And the longer they want them to stay there, the higher the proof. So it is required that they're providing some kind of treatment. I would also say that just because we've detained them doesn't absolutely mean that the hospital that we detained them to cannot let them go. They can. They can reevaluate them and decide that they are compensated enough to let them go, and they will, and they do. Also, I would also add to that that if we make a decision to detain, or we make a decision not to detain, and you folks think that, let me start that over. Let's say you folks make a referral, and we have, you have the right to petition the court directly if we do not respond to that case in 48 hours. It's called Joel's Law. And Joel's Law says that you folks can petition the court directly regardless of our decision. And if we don't respond within 48 hours. So if we haven't responded in 48 hours, or we saw the patient and we didn't detain, and you think that we should have, you can write your declaration explaining all the stuff that you think constitutes this person needing to be detained, submit that to the court, and the court can make a decision on whether or not to have them detained. In those cases, my office becomes the processor, and the folks that will meet with law enforcement to do the pickup. But we're not the ones making the decision in those cases. That's between the referent and the court.
Can you file online, or does that be person?
Well, in this day and age, it's almost everything's online. So my recommendation would be to call the ITA court. There's a family liaison there, and to ask them what you need. That's totally within their realm. If you folks were to call my number and ask us, where do I find the paperwork? How do I do that? We're definitely going to walk you through it. It's not our job to walk you through it, but we know that this is a complicated mess. And so we will walk you through it if you just call our office. Another law that came into action, another piece of the law, a change in it. In 2018, the law changed when it changed the designated mental health professionals to designated crisis responders. It also asked the state to open up what's called Secure Withdrawal, Stabilization, and Management Facilities, SWIMS facilities. Now, these are facilities for folks that we detain under Ricky's Law, and Ricky's Law allows us to detain people now that are decompensated due to substance use disorder. But the criteria remains the same as the mental health. So we still have to have either a substance use, we call it behavioral health, a behavioral health disorder, so either substance abuse or mental health disorder. So you'll have that, and then also coupled with some type of crisis behavior, either a danger to themselves, a danger to others, and literally the behavioral health issue needs to be causing that. That's the criteria. We call it the nexus. That's the nexus. Because, you know, in America, folks have the right to refuse treatment. Folks have the right to also be, have a behavioral health condition and not be detained for it. It's when the behavioral health condition is causing a more severe problem, them to be a danger to you or to themselves or to someone else's property, or it's causing them to neglect their health and safety. That's grave disability. So, and if it's causing that, we can make a case to detain them until they can get stable enough so that their behavioral health condition is not causing the crisis. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, so tell me more about the swim facility. Is it something conducive to mental health, or are we doing a really terrible job of just sort of securing them? I don't.
So what I will say is we have what we call evaluation and treatment centers. We've always had those. That's where we send the mental health patients. A lot of those, I'm going to call them ENTs, evaluation and treatment centers, ENT. Those centers, a lot of those do co-occurring work, but a SWIMS facility is licensed slightly different. It's a new invention, and I don't know why the legislature chose to adopt that model. I don't think it's I won't get into what I think about why, but there's a couple things that they didn't do in those. Well, first let me tell you, the ENT and the SWIMS facility are exactly the same on paper. They have the exact same staffing. They are able to do the exact same things. The only thing that's different is that the SWIMS facility has a substance use disorder professional in it by design. And the ENTs, not all of them do. That's the only difference. The structure of the law is different in this way, that if we detain someone, let's say someone is using heroin and they are overdosing every 4 hours or so, and they just can't stop it, right? If we go to detain that person and they don't have any history of mental health disorder, but a clear history of substance use disorder, that's a likely candidate for for detainment. However, if the SWIMS facility, for whatever reason, doesn't have a bed for them, and I can tell you the one in our region has 16 beds. Any thoughts about that? Yeah, I can tell you, not enough. I can tell you that right now. Not enough.
Who runs that facility, the 60-bed facility?
Who has it? Recovery Place Kent. If it's substance use only and we deem them necessary to detain, we can't detain unless we have a bed for them, right? And so if they won't take them, let's say this person, let's say the exclusionary criteria for this particular facility is they can't take anyone with MRSA. Okay, so we can't get them in that bed. They won't take them. What we're obligated to do is to do a no-bed report and then not detain.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, to me it doesn't make sense because if I evaluated them and I deemed them necessary to detain, we should be detaining them. We should be trying to find a way to detain them, but we can't. And the reason why we can't is because of a funding mechanism that's not in the law. For mental health, if we decide to detain and there's not a bed available, I single bed certify that person to that hospital bed that I detained them to. Was it St. Francis, St. Anne's, Swedish? I can, wherever that emergency room is, I can single bed cert them, and they can start treating them right away in that bed, in that emergency room. For substance use disorder, that mechanism for the single bed certification does not exist in the law. So therefore, I cannot single bed cert them and wait for the next available bed.
And we have an opioid crisis going on that's still. Okay. Good to know.
I'm just a messenger. So you folks are going to get me fired before the night's out. Start talking like that. So with Ricky's Law, however, we can detain. In King County, well, any clinicians in the room? Yeah, great. For the clinicians in the room, I'd say even for law enforcement, they know it too. Most of the folks that we detain, most of the folks that we see have co-occurring disorder. Most of them.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but most of them.
Right.
And so wherever possible, when you make a referral to our office, what is advantageous to the patient, most of all, because we want to do what's right by the patient first and foremost. What's advantageous to the patient is for you not to make a referral and say, this is a Ricky's Law referral. It's substance abuse only, and they need to be detained in a SWIMS facility. Don't say that. What the best thing for you to say is, and I'm going to say it in the simplest terms as I can, throw all the spaghetti up against the wall. Just tell us what you've seen, what you heard, what they said to you, what they smelled like, what you know about them, all of the things. Talk about the behaviors and the symptoms. Give us that. Because then we're not walking into it with a preconceived notion of what it is. And then when we make our evaluation, we can make our because we make our evaluation and make our determination at the time of in that meeting that we have with them. And that's what's going to determine where we're going to send them. Many times we're still utilizing Ricky's Law, but not, because we're detaining under both Ricky's Law, under substance abuse, and under mental health. But if it's narrowed for us, we might not have the opportunity to discover that, right? So don't try to dictate it because you know and you've seen it, and you know exactly that these folks are a bit out of control with substances. Just give us all the spaghetti, and we'll make a decision at the end of the line. And sometimes the end of the line is, yeah, this is a Ricky's Law case, strictly only. But wherever we can, we will make the case to get the treatment for the person that we can. And we don't detain everyone. Lots of folks we don't. Lots of folks we refer back to their providers because their providers know them best. But a lot of times it's their providers that are opening the case with us. So saying this person's decompensating in a similar way that they were last time. And they can use your help right now. And they're stopped taking their medication, and they've started the behaviors that they had prior. It looks like they're going down that same path, and so they fill out a declaration. They give us all the spaghetti that they can, and then we'll end up calling their family members and neighbors or whoever else might know something about it to do more of a deep dive investigation before we go see them. Okay, so that was a lot again. Any questions now? Based on that bit of information. Yes, sir.
How long does that process usually take?
Oh, gosh, I wish you wouldn't have asked that. Okay.
I ask because my wife has gone through several cycles of that. She's been incarcerated in several facilities. And each time I've had officers come to our house, and it's been bad, and it's been frustrating, and it's taken days. And these days are when, if somebody's off their medications, that spirals in a way that you cannot believe, and to have to stay up all night on suicide watch after the police have left your house is really, really an experience that I can't share.
Yeah. So let me try to answer your question directly. RCW 7105 and RCW 7134, and I guess I should explain what those two things are. RCW 7105 is the ITA law for adults. RCW
ITA being involuntary?
Involuntary Treatment Act.
Okay.
7134 is for adolescents. And for adolescents, what that means is 13 to 17. 18 above is adults, and it does not apply whatsoever to folks 12 and under. So there is another slight difference between the adolescents, with the criteria: danger to self, danger to other, danger to property, gravely disabled. Those have to have imminence attached to it if we're going to detain in an emergent fashion. And they also have to have the likelihood of serious harm. So, like, it's going to happen if we leave here, we probably shouldn't leave. The NED that I talked about earlier, that non-emergent order, that just needs, it doesn't have imminence attached to it. That's just the likelihood, meaning that this person's decompensating, but there's a chance that they may be okay if their provider gets involved with them, or we have time to see if they recompensate before we pick them up. So it's a slightly different, but to answer the question on what the time frames are, if we have an order from a judge to evaluate someone in custody or out of custody, usually those orders are 72 judicial hours from the time the order was signed, that we have to do an investigation and see those folks. That's written into the law. If a person goes to a hospital, emergency room, walks in, we call a walk-in, or if you were to bring somebody into the emergency room, we call that a voluntary walk-in to the emergency room. So there's a couple things going on there. One, just because you're at the hospital doesn't mean that we're going to get the referral. The social worker at the hospital is going to do an evaluation. They have to invite us into the hospital. Two, law enforcement, they do an involve, and they can take somebody to the hospital for observation, but that's not an ITA hold. That's an involve to the hospital to be evaluated by a social worker. So, just because they were picked up by police and taken to the hospital doesn't mean that my office is going to see them. And just because they walked into the hospital doesn't mean that we're going to see them either, because we might not get the referral. So the hospital has to make that referral. Unless, of course, we already have a referral open, then if we know that they're there, because we might not know, if we know that they're there, if you were to call us and say, hey, we have a referral open and they're at the hospital right now, we'll call the hospital. We'll say, hey, we got a case open. That doesn't always happen. And so if they walk into a hospital or you bring them into a hospital, that's called voluntary. That 6 hours from the time that case is open to the time we get there and make a decision. That's our timeline. It's written into the statute like that. If law enforcement brings them to the hospital and then the hospital, if they're acting on time and they're going to follow the officer's guidelines, which is make a referral, they don't always do that. If they do that, then we have 12 hours from what we call a law enforcement involve to get there and make that decision. Now, I don't know why the legislature separated those out in those different timelines like that. And then I'll also tell you that the community outreaches, the one that you were just speaking about, they don't have a legislative timeline attached to it. So we spend a lot of time being held accountable for these timelines and making sure that we're meeting the timelines, while some folks wait longer at home or at the shelter or in the unhoused communities. And I want to tell you folks that my office, if you talk to anybody in my office, they'll tell you they don't think that anybody sitting at home or in the unhoused communities or anywhere else that doesn't have a timeline on it is any more or any less important than the folks sitting in the hospital. They're not. They're all in crisis. And we can do better. But unfortunately, we look at these timelines and we're triaging all day, every day. And then as I said, a whole bunch of things have to go well all at one time in order to actually have a pickup occur. At any given time, we have, I said, 6 to 8 staff on staff. 2 of those folks are on the phone. 2 of them are in an outreach team. That leaves 2, maybe 3 more that are in the hospitals, doing hospital and jail cases. And that's per shift, right? So we don't nearly have enough. And as I shared with you earlier, we are understaffed like everybody else. That's not a justification, and that's not, we can do better. We can all do better. So hear that loudly.
Are you getting increased, have you guys got plans to increase staffing due to the opioid crisis?
Not due to the opioid crisis, that's not doing it for us, but we did just get 7 more positions. I would like to have 17 more, need kind of probably 27, but we did just get 7 more, so we are going to turn those into outreach teams, hopefully increase our presence in the outreach to limit the time that it takes to get to somebody's home. Yes, sir.
You said shifts. How many shifts do you have? How many people per shift?
Yeah, so any given shift, we have 6 to 8 people on a shift. Some of those are overlapping, some of them coming on, some of them going off. And we have 5 shifts a day.
And is it the Washington Healthcare Authority, the grants authority for entities like the county to have DCRs, or can a city have a DCR?
A city cannot have a DCR. It's county. Some of the counties do a tri-county grouping, and they hire different agencies to do it, but they have to be deemed by the county that's designated by the county. That's in the name, designated crisis responder. So the county designates it. HCA contracts with each county for the work. And it's done slightly different in each county. For instance, in our county, we go, like I said, we go absolutely everywhere. In other counties, they only see people in the hospital. So, and there are slight different variations to the work.
Where's the funding coming up for like only 16 beds? Because it seems, incredibly.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know who funds that bed. We don't pay for those beds out of our contract. But the agency contracts with the county, probably more with the department, to do the work.
But it's probably state funding, right?
I think what we're trying to figure out is why only 16 beds.
Yeah, how do you get
Yeah, so.
Right, and
so-
where's the community, so we elected these people,
Mhm.
so which kind of elected body is it we're looking at? I think it's probably
Legislature.
the state legislature.
Yeah. What I would tell you about why nobody wants to take on that work. It was new and different when it came out. They thought there was going to be a great need for it, and it didn't pan out that way because there were too many restrictions around it. ABHS, ABHS, what does that stand for? So anyway, ABHS has two of them, one in Spokane, one in Chehalis. I believe the one in Chehalis is thriving, but the one in Spokane, I think, is pretty close to shuttering their doors, is the last thing that I read on that. Recovery Place Kent, they're making their way. They struggled in the beginning, but they're making their way. They're taking a lot of folks from out of county as well. So, I can tell you that. But you would have to talk to them to
I
really
get
figure out.
lost in the acronyms, so what, what?
ABHS, and I was just trying to remember what that acronym was, and I just can't bring it
So
to.
it could be behavioral health.
Yeah, I can't bring it to bear.
Okay, so I think.
But if you want to email me tomorrow, I can email it to you. I can definitely do that, but it's been a long day. My day starts at 6:30.
But just expanding the number of beds in the 16-bed facility may not do any good because they're not filling them because they're.
Oh, so I think I probably should tell you folks that it's not as simple as just expanding the number of beds. There's a federal regulation that requires these facilities to only have the 16 beds. And in order to have more than 16 beds, there has to be a federal waiver for that. And so it's a complicated mess. And so you might be able to get, that one facility could only have 16 beds. And actually that facility in Kent is a unique facility because it's split down the middle. And on one side is an ENT, and on the other side is a SWIMS facility, right? But they are licensed separately to do separate things, which I thought was brilliant. Why not?
Right, okay, so they're restricted to 16 beds each,
Mm-hmm.
but the state legislature is in charge of how many that we have.
They should be, the state legislature wrote into the legislation that they needed to have X amount of facilities, but saying that you need to have X amount of facilities and then getting providers, which nonprofit or for-profit, they are a business, to sign on to something that doesn't have it's a rough call. So it's kind of like adolescent treatment. Adolescent treatment is disappearing all over the place too, right? And so folks do not want to sign up for it. And so in order to have the work done, you have to have somebody willing to raise their hand and say, I'll do it.
Right.
And so folks aren't doing that. We do not have an adolescent SWIMS facility in the state. We had one group in Vancouver that signed up to do it, but then they thought they knew what they were doing, and they realized that they didn't know what they were doing. So, but that's outside of my pay grade to talk about those things. Probably won't have a job tomorrow if I do. But the truth is, it's a hard sell.